For a long time now, I kept hearing about a neighborhood in Brooklyn called Brownsville. People kept saying, "You think the South Bronx is bad? You need to see Brownsville. It's roooough." And the data backs it up. Brownsville has been called the most dangerous neighborhood in New York City. It has a bad reputation that goes back a long time. So of course I had to see it. So I went there. It was a cold and breezy day in NYC the day I arrived. The sun was out, but it was only 38 degrees. And we're going to take a drive through the worst neighborhood in this city and learn a little bit about the place and talk to residents who live here. Should be fun. Let's go. Brownsville is somewhere everyone knows of, and the crime is bad and the poverty's so bad, and crazy stuff in the projects go on. They shoot away, somebody's blown away, somebody's gone away. Ahh Brownsville, the notorious BBK. If you live in the greater New York City area, you've heard of how bad this place is. There's shootings and robberies here all the time. It's located on the eastern side of Brooklyn, near East New York, about halfway between Manhattan and JFK. 58,000 people live here, and it's packed into 1 square mile. It's basically 1 square mile of housing projects. It's been dangerous here for 100 years now. In the late 1920s, the organized crime group Murder, Inc. operated out of Brownsville. They were the enforcement arm for the Italian mafia and the Jewish mob. This place used to be called Brown's Village. It was marketed to the Jewish community, and then a lot of African Americans moved here in the 1950s because it was affordable. A lot of the black families that moved into Brownsville were already poor, and the timing was bad. As soon as they began to arrive, factories began to shut down. Then when things got dangerous here, the Jewish factory worker families moved out. Then the New York Housing Authority built a bunch of housing projects here, which brought in a lot more African Americans and Latinos. We'll see many of those housing projects as we drive along. It's said Brownsville has the highest concentration of housing projects in the nation. There's 100 different housing projects here, all in 1 square mile. The boxer Mike Tyson actually lived in a housing project here growing up, and we all remember how angry Mike Tyson was. Jeez. As poor families flooded in, crime began to spike here. Soon, by the 1980s, this place was known nationwide as outrageous for crime and poverty. Many of these housing projects had the highest per capita arrests of any housing developments in the whole city. Unemployment and welfare plagued the housing developments here, which flamed the spike in crime. The single mother rate in Brownsville was also twice the national rate. The 60s and 70s saw a lot of rioting and unrest. By that time, 98% of the population was either black or Latino, which further segregated this neighborhood from nearby neighborhoods in New York City. In the 70s, they tried knocking down a lot of the abandoned tenement-style apartments and putting in townhouse-style apartment homes. But crime kept going up as local gangs used these new apartments for their operations. By the time the 80s were over, this neighborhood was a true ghetto. One NYC author once called Brownsville a permanent ghetto. And that is so sad. Today, things are still really bad. Gentrification still hasn't taken hold. This neighborhood's surrounded on all sides by other high poverty, high crime hoods. Only half the kids in Brownsville graduate high school. 40% of the population lives in poverty, and 1 in 6 people hasn't worked in a long time. It's the poorest neighborhood in Brooklyn and the 7th poorest of all New York City neighborhoods. Families bring in about $22,000 a year. That's why so many live in these housing projects. It doesn't help that 40% of the kids born here are to teenage mothers. And it doesn't help that the incarceration rate among Brownsville residents is the second highest of all New York City neighborhoods either. It's drug-related hospitalizations, obesity, lack of health insurance, mental illness, a lot of business closings. It's sad and it's tragic. Crime-wise, it's certainly the most dangerous neighborhood in all of New York City. They don't call this the murder capital of NYC for nothing. There were 25 murders in this neighborhood last year, which is 1 for every 2,300 residents. News stories talk about people being run over by cars here, or shot at local delis, or stabbed on the bus. There's stories about UPS drivers needing police escorts to deliver packages here. Or sometimes they just spray bullets at people standing outside their homes. A lot of the kids who grew up here only know violence. Their playgrounds aren't maintained, and there's broken lights and graffiti everywhere. Other neighborhoods in New York City have seen their crime rates go down. Not here. Nuh-uh. You can imagine what it's like at night here. Lots of gangs and drugs and lowlifes. Of course, there are tons of great people here. It's just a shame the losers ruin the place for everyone else. Today, this part of Brooklyn's one of the most affordable neighborhoods you can live in New York City. You can imagine why, but affordable to New York might not sound affordable to you. A single family home here ranges from $500 to $800,000, and a two-bedroom apartment's about $2K a month.
Did you know there's more than 1 million apartment units in New York City?
I didn't, but I'd bet 100% of them have bed bugs and roaches like this.
Hey!
Ew! Run, Mappy! That's gross. Overall, while Brownsville continues to struggle, Brooklyn as a whole isn't that bad anymore. It's actually getting gentrified at an alarming rate. There's all these new big fancy buildings sprouting up everywhere, and much of the west side of Brooklyn, closer to the Brooklyn Bridge, is much nicer than what we just saw. I had a great time when in downtown Brooklyn, and I met some really nice people. The folks at the Brazen Head on Atlantic Avenue were super cool. I recommend you pop in and see them when you're in town. Oh, and somebody gave me this list of bars that are after hours in Brooklyn, if you're into that kind of thing. Okay, YouTube, so joining me, we have a special guest. It's Action Kid from YouTube. I'm sure you've seen his videos. What's going on, Kenneth?
I'm pretty good, man.
I had stumbled across your video when you went into Brownsville and you kind of walked around and you were showing people, and I'm showing some of that footage right now of you walking around when you're, in the housing projects of Brownsville. I drove around Brownsville for, an afternoon, and, it's supposedly the most dangerous place in New York City, and one of the poorest places. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's just mostly just housing projects all over the place. Talk to people about Brownsville a little bit. Does it get a bad rep? Is it as dangerous as people think it is?
Yeah, it really does get a bad rap because it used to be a lot worse back in like the 70s and 80s when there was a lot of like gang violence, but nowadays it really seems to have died down a lot. I still think the most dangerous place in New York is in Midtown Manhattan, because there, like, the criminals know that people will be around and they're easier targets. But every time I've gone to Brownsville, it's been a pleasant experience. The community is very nice, and I even know a bar over there. I forgot the Villain's Hideout. They recently opened in Brownsville, I think a year ago, and they've been having good business.
Yeah, it's a very unique place. How has Brooklyn, Brownsville, how has that area changed since you were a kid?
To be honest, I didn't really go there too much as a kid, but I know nowadays it seems like it's more of a community involvement, and the people there are trying to like make their lives better and just trying to like live their lives. I don't really see anything like wrong with it. I know a friend, she teaches in Brownsville, and the kids there are very nice. The parents are friendly.
But so the bad rap part about Brownsville, yes, it's not as bad as it's meant to be, but the data is all pretty current though. We're not looking at like data from like the 80s and 90s. Do you think that it's just a matter of just beef between people like in the housing projects, and it doesn't really spill out onto the main streets and to normal people? Is that why it feels so inviting there?
Yeah, I guess so. Probably just between people who live there and like the groups involved. I mean, if you have people stuffed in the housing projects, then there's probably going to be a lot of domestic violence that I don't really see on the streets. It'll probably just be within the units of people living there, and that's what I haven't really seen when I've been to Brownsville. But as far as like the stores and the streets itself, I didn't really feel, that there was a air of like danger around.
Do you ever talk to the people that live in some of those housing projects down in Brooklyn? Have you ever sat down and chatted with any of them?
Just some quick little interactions with people on the street. I asked one guy says is Brownville dangerous, as they say. Is like, no, this they're lying. It's so overhyped. Like people here are so awesome and friendly. But yeah, I would think it's mainly the domestic violence stuff that happens within the housing projects themselves that probably make it dangerous or more dangerous than it is.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Do you think the people that live in these housing projects in Brownsville, um, do they have a plan to get out of there, or are they pretty much generationally like attached to these units?
I'm not too sure. I know if people really did have the chance, they would like to move out of the housing projects and like make it for themselves and become big. But the way the system is set up there is that in New York, it's kind of strange because once you make like over a certain income limit, then you stop getting the social services, like your EBT, the food stamps. They start reducing it, or your rent programs, they'll start to disappear, and you'll start have to be paying higher prices. So it's kind of like they're disincentivizing people from making more money or trying to get out.
Yeah, I mean, you start to make more money, then you make less money, so you're kind of
Yeah.
where you were before. So if you're making $2,700 as a couple on benefits and working part time, and then you start to get your full time job, then your benefits go down, and so now you're still both making almost the same amount of money. That to me, I don't know any other way around it though. You can't keep
Yeah.
giving people benefits if they're making more money. Um, yeah, that is a terrible situation because you're right. You're disincentivized to move on up in the world because you're going to basically be right where you were if you're not. So you could work part time and make same amount as you would if you worked full time.
Yeah, and that's kind of like a strange like issue to solve. I mean, in one way, you do want to help these people who can't really earn the high incomes, but then when they do, it's like we're punishing them. So maybe like a compromise would be like they'll be able to still get the social services for like a few months, and then if they successful, then they'll start weighing them off. Maybe that's something that can be done. I don't know.
Give people an idea on, you're out and about in Brooklyn all the time. How has Brooklyn changed since before you were there and since you've been there? I know it's changed a lot.
It's changed a lot. There was definitely a lot more noticeable crime in the 90s when we would come visit. Definitely in the 2000s and 2010s, there was an observable difference. But I would say that over the last 2, 3 years, I mean, since COVID, you can kind of see things sliding back a little bit.
I mean, crime's getting worse after a peak in the 90s. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Why did they think that is?
I think COVID had an effect on a lot of people's jobs. I think that Mayor de Blasio was an absolute horrible mayor in New York, and he he just was not enforcing rule of law too well. And I think that homelessness also increased a lot. A lot of incentives to build and expand shelters were put in place, and I mean, you can see news articles all about these homeless shelters kind of gutting a lot of New York. I mean, all types of neighborhoods are very anti these shelters, and also I don't know if you know, but when they during COVID, they took a lot of prisoners out of Rikers Island and just kind of spread them all around the city, and a lot of them were housed in these shelters. So just also less enforcement. When there was the whole abolish the police movement in New York, that there was an immediate increase in the crime is anywhere as high now as it was in the early 90s. But you can definitely get the sense that things are slipping backwards.
Mm-hmm. Um, so Brownsville has a reputation as being like the most dangerous, poorest neighborhood in New York City. I've been to far worse places than Brownsville. I drove around in early February to kind of check it out. Um, it's gritty and grungy in some areas. There's definitely some action going on, but I felt like it wasn't the worst place I've been. Does Brownsville reputation, is it overrated for it being so dangerous and poor and bad?
I think it's definitely. I think it's look. The numbers are the numbers, and Brownsville, the fact of the matter is, has the highest concentration of public housing in the entire country. But that aside, I mean, there's also on top of that, rather, the reputation from rap music, especially like Biggie Smalls, talking about Brownsville, and you hear like Tyson and like even Al Sharpton, it was from Brownsville. Uh, it's built a reputation as being a hard place, and in a lot of ways it is. But I walk around Pitkin Avenue often, and it's fine place to shop. I don't think that during the day anybody should feel uncomfortable walking around Brownsville. The architecture is beautiful. It's pretty quiet, especially like in the Riverdale Avenue area. It's a lot of single family homes, and the real estate is actually pretty expensive. I mean, not compared to New York, but according to compared to national numbers, it's still relatively expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like Brooklyn's changed a lot. So I was there 10, 15 years ago, and it was kind of rough, especially the west side of Brooklyn. And I'm not, I was only there for a day when I was in town, but I felt like there's a lot of gentrification. There's a lot of new buildings. There's a lot of energy, lots of new stuff, restaurants and bars and places to hang out. Is that something that is going to make its way into the east side of Brooklyn, you think? Or is that happening now?
I think it is. It already has started. Investment, a lot of affordable housing being put up. A lot of you have to understand. A lot of New York City's buildings are very, very old. More than 100 years old, and a lot of these old buildings are slated to be demolished and redeveloped. And money's going to come here. Investment is going to come here one way or another because the demand is still here. New York's population is still, very large and robust.
So they're just going to continue knocking buildings down in Brooklyn and putting new ones up. That's the plan.
I think so. I mean, especially with a lot of the rezoning that's been happening over the last, 10 years. They're granting more air rights. Ultimately, I think the quality of life is going to be improving, especially, there's a lot of incentive programs for lower income people, elderly people. And I think that that's going to keep fueling development in places, all across the city, but especially in places like Brownsville and East New York.
So in terms of the gentrification thing, do people in Brooklyn support that? Are they against it? I mean, you talk to some people and they're like, oh, it's so good. It helps revitalize communities and it cleans up the crime and the blight. Some people are like, oh, no, you're kicking out the poor people and it's not fair. How do you feel about gentrification in Brooklyn?
It's a mixed bag. I'm sympathetic to people who feel like, they grew up in a certain neighborhood and they want to live in that neighborhood and it's becoming less affordable. I mean, we're in an economy with almost 8% inflation right now. So, I mean, it's kind of a moving target, even to make a statement like that. Who knows where things will end up? But I'm sympathetic to that. At the same time, though, more investment in a neighborhood is usually a good thing. It brings job opportunities. It improves the area. Crime, it usually goes hand in hand with lower crime rates. So it's a mixed bag. But I think I think that things will improve. I mean, I don't know if investment in an area is necessarily what people consider, if someone's building affordable housing or someone's just making what's already there better, even if like no one's getting displaced, is that considered gentrification? I don't know. But I think that things are going to be moving in a trend towards improvement regardless.
Mm-hmm. What's the word on the street in the Brownsville area? What is it exactly that makes it so dangerous? Shootings, robberies, assaults? Like, is it that kind of stuff? Is it on the news all the time? Like, what's going on over there?
It's a rough neighborhood. There's there's a reputation over there. When you're from a neighborhood with a reputation, you grow up there, and it's known to be rough. I think that perpetuates the culture of the neighborhood. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah. What do they need to do to make it less dangerous there? Like, start enforcing the law, like take guns off the streets. Like, is that what they're trying to do? What are they talking about?
I feel like law enforcement, it's very prominent. The police station over there looks like a fortress. So, I don't know if enforcement is the problem, but as far as like, the housing projects that are there, it's not like you can just, rezone or change that area like at the snap of a finger. But moving forward, what I think can be done, at least as a preventative measure, is to stop propagating these homeless shelters that are popping up everywhere, which I think just irritates an already rough situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a shame. They're doing that. It's not just in New York. I mean, the homeless shelters are, dominating the West Coast landscape, and it's sad because there's a neighborhood that is doing okay, and then all of a sudden you bring in drug addicts and mentally ill, and you try to help them. They don't want to be helped, and so they end up wandering the streets and breaking windows and starting fights and leaving a mess, and it's just bad, and there's no solution for that at all. So I feel bad for neighborhoods that have that brought into them. Although these people need help, but where are you going to help them? There has to be somewhere. You can't just put them on Rikers Island.
And in New York, the local people, regardless of the situation, the crime situation in their neighborhood, they're usually very, very vocal against these shelters. But there's usually a lot of political and developer interest. There's a lot of money behind these shelters, and I think that they just steamroll the interest of the local neighborhoods, and a lot of these politicians and developers do whatever they want, and they don't consider, what's good for the neighborhood.
No, they do not. That's been going on for a while. Well, hopefully they can, get the place to where they need to be. It's going to be tough when you've got housing projects and homeless shelters on every block. Those populations tend to draw in a lot of crime. But everything goes in cycles. So hopefully Brownsville's reputation will one day not be so bad.
I'm very hopeful for the future for Brooklyn in general, and especially for Brownsville. Still a ton of beautiful architecture and just a vibrant community, and a lot of commercial activity and great people, kind people. If you're carrying something heavy from your car, I've been offered in the past, people offering to help out, to carry stuff. And, reputation is one thing, but, the reality on the ground is often something else. Yeah. And also, if you're not involved in the drama of the crime, you're usually fine. And I've never had any problems, and I've been into many of the businesses there, bought shoes on Pitkin Avenue, gotten haircuts, which I need one right now, but yeah, I gotten haircuts on Pitkin Avenue, which is the main commercial part of Brownsville. But I've never had any issues over there.
Mm. I keep hearing that a lot of people are fleeing New York City. COVID related and housing affordability. Everybody's wanting cheaper and warmer and safer. Is that true? Do you hear a lot of people that say they're boning out from New York, headed south, or is that just like media hype at this point?
I think that a lot of the people who don't have solid roots in New York, who were working probably in corporate jobs, it was very easy for them to leave. But you'll also see articles where people are saying that they regret that they were too hasty in leaving as a result of COVID. And there's definitely demand. Commercial real estate is a different story. I think a lot of people are finding it very difficult to make ends meet as business owners, and just so much has moved online. But that was already a trend prior to COVID because of competition from Amazon and Alibaba. But I think just COVID sped up that process. It didn't necessarily cause it. So, but that's a whole other thing. Residential seems to be back in full swing.
Okay, so residents aren't leaving as fast as they were. In fact, maybe the outflow has slowed down. But the commercial aspect that intrigued me. So when you have these small mom and pops and these old retail locations in these neighborhoods, liquor stores, bodegas, pharmacies, markets, and they start to leave because of they just can't afford to stay open. How does that negatively impact an already troubled neighborhood?
I don't know. I don't know how to say this, but a lot of businesses in rougher areas actually have a certain kind of resilience to them because a lot of them operate in cash.
Yeah, we should probably stop that conversation right there.